My mom always said Christmas was about family, but she never mentioned what happens when family feels more like an audience than a home. Every year I drove 3 hours through the snow hoping this time would be different. It never was. Still, I went back, carrying the perfect gift, thinking maybe love could fix what silence had broken. I didn't know that by the end of that night, one sentence from my mother would change everything and turn the most beautiful Christmas into the coldest one of my life. The highway was slick with melting snow, and the windshield wipers moved in slow, steady arcs, like a metronome keeping time with my thoughts. I'd made this drive so many times before, 3 hours from the city to the town I once called home, yet somehow, this time felt different. Maybe it was the way the radio hummed with soft Christmas songs, or maybe it was the quiet hope I still hadn't learned to let go of. Every year, I told myself the same thing. Maybe this Christmas will be different. Maybe Mom will smile at me for real. Maybe Dad will actually ask how I've been. Maybe Max will look at me without that smirk that says he's already won. It sounds foolish, doesn't it, to keep believing something might change after all these years. But hope, I've learned, is stubborn. It lingers even when logic tells you to give up. The snow started falling harder as I turned onto the narrow road leading to our old neighborhood. The houses here all looked like they'd been pulled from a holiday postcard, wreaths on every door, glowing reindeer on lawns, smoke curling up from chimneys. When I saw our house, my breath caught. It was perfect, just like always. Lights lined the roof in crisp white rows, the front windows gleamed, and the big bay window glowed with the warm flicker of candles. Mom's touch was everywhere. She always made sure Christmas looked perfect, even if it didn't feel that way. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, the engine humming beneath me, my hands resting on the wrapped envelope in the passenger seat, my gift. It wasn't anything flashy, just a simple weekend trip for Mom and Dad to that lake they'd once dreamed of visiting back when money was tight. I remembered hearing them talk about it when I was a kid, saying maybe someday, when things got better. Well, things had gotten better, at least for me. I'd worked hard, saved every spare dollar, and finally earned the kind of job that came with stability. I wanted to share that. I wanted to give them a little piece of peace. I stepped out of the car, and the cold hit me hard, sharp, clean, unforgiving. It felt honest, the kind of cold that didn't lie. The door opened before I could knock. "Ellie?" Mom's voice was bright, rehearsed, the kind of cheer you hear in commercials. She hugged me halfway, already adjusting her bracelet before letting go. Her perfume, the same brand she's worn since I was a kid, filled the space between us. I used to love that scent. Now it just smelled like old expectations. "You made it through the snow," she said, smiling like it was a surprise. "Of course," I said, "wouldn't miss it." From the living room, Dad waved without getting up. Football on TV, volume too loud. The universal dad signal for, "Please don't make me pick sides tonight." And then there was Max, my older brother, my mom's forever favorite, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine, wearing that grin that always made him look like the golden child who'd never done a thing wrong. "Ellie, look at you," he said, raising his glass. "City girl survived another year." I smiled, even laughed, because that's what I always did. The kitchen smelled like sugar and spice, roasted ham, cinnamon rolls, Mom's famous sweet potato casserole covered with marshmallows perfectly browned on top. Everything gleamed. The crystal bowls, the folded napkins, the polished silverware. It was a magazine spread, staged down to the last snowflake. And in the middle of it all stood my mother, her posture perfect, her lipstick flawless, her expression a mix of pride and control. She thrived on appearances, every candle perfectly centered, every curtain drawn just enough to let the neighbors see how festive we were. To the world, she was the picture of grace. To us, or maybe just to me, she was a storm wrapped in tinsel. Still, as I hung up my coat, I told myself to let it go. This was Christmas Eve, the one night I wanted to believe we could pretend long enough to feel like a real family again. We sat down to dinner, the plates glimmering in candlelight. The table was set for 4, but it always felt like 3.5. I filled the half, the listener, the buffer, the one who laughed at the right times to keep things easy. Mom complimented Max on his new business venture. From what I could tell, That meant taking calls at coffee shops and calling it networking. But she hung on every word, like he was changing the world. Dad nodded in rhythm, chewing quietly. "So, Ellie," Mom said at one point, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Still working in the city, her tone made working sound like a hobby for the bored. "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, I got promoted last month." "Oh," a blink, a small nod. "That's nice." Then, turning to Max, "Do you want more gravy, sweetheart?" It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the invisibility. The way love in that house always came with conditions, performance, obedience, perfection. I learned young that in order to belong, I had to make myself small. But tonight, I wanted to believe something different. Maybe the gift would help. Maybe when Mom opened it, she'd see that all I'd ever wanted was for her to be proud. I looked at her, as she laughed at something Max said, her face glowing in the candlelight. She looked happy, or at least she knew how to look like it. And for a second, I let myself believe that if I could just keep smiling, maybe this Christmas really would be different. That's the dangerous thing about hope. It doesn't disappear when it should. It hides behind every soft light, every memory of who you wish they were, whispering, "Maybe this time." I held on to that thought like it was a lifeline. I told myself that the past didn't have to repeat itself, that families could heal, that love could still find its way back through all the sharp edges and old mistakes. But deep down, beneath the warmth of the candles and the hum of carols drifting from the radio, something colder waited. And before the night was over, I'd learned that even the most beautiful Christmas can shatter with just one sentence. Dinner at my parents' house always looked like something out of a magazine, but it never felt like home. The table gleamed under soft golden light, every fork and spoon lined perfectly, as if joy could be measured in symmetry. Mom moved around the kitchen with that familiar precision, adjusting candles and rearranging napkins that were already straight. She lived for this kind of performance, for the illusion of control. I sat down between Dad and Max, the same seat I had every year, the one that made me feel both included and invisible. Dad's eyes were fixed on the TV from across the room, pretending the football game was far more urgent than the people sitting beside him. It was his way of surviving family dinners. Mom called it being peaceful. I used to call it disappointing. Max, meanwhile, had already started talking about his latest project, his so-called startup idea. From what I gathered, it involved spending hours at coffee shops on his laptop and telling everyone he was networking. But Mom beamed as if he had just invented something that would change the world. "Our little genius," she said proudly, patting his shoulder. Max smiled at me as he poured himself another glass of wine. "So, Ellie," he said, "still working those long city hours? Must be exhausting keeping up with those corporate types." "Something like that," I replied. He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that's meant to sound harmless but isn't. Mom chuckled along, and even Dad gave a polite grin. I wanted to believe it was just teasing, but deep down I knew it wasn't. In this family, every joke carried a truth we didn't dare say out loud. The food looked perfect. The roasted ham glistened under the light. The sweet potato casserole smelled exactly like my childhood. For a moment, the scent almost made me forget. But then I noticed how Mom placed everything just right in front of Max, while my plate was off to the side, as if I had wandered into someone else's dinner by accident. Still, I smiled. That's what I always did. Smiling made things easier. Mom sat down finally, smoothing her dress before folding her hands neatly. "So," she said, her tone light but sharp. "Still working in the city?" "Yes," I said. "Actually, I got promoted last month." She blinked. "Oh, that's nice." And just like that, the conversation moved on, back to Max's business venture, his new apartment, his plans for the future. The kind of future I had already built for myself, without applause. I chewed slowly, nodding at the right times, laughing when they laughed, though every chuckle felt like another small betrayal of my own feelings. The sound of my mother's laugh, bright and flawless, echoed around the table like it belonged in a stranger's house. For a moment I looked across the table at the tree in the living room, the ornaments glowing in the soft light. I spotted one I had made in grade school, a tiny felt angel with uneven wings tucked deep near the back. The front branches, the ones visible to guests, were covered with shiny ornaments. Max's baby's first Christmas ball hung proudly in the center. Of course, it shouldn't have mattered after all this time. But it did. The smallest things always did. Dad cleared his throat, a familiar sound he made whenever he wanted to avoid speaking. "Food's great, honey," he said. "Thank you," Mom replied, already focused on refilling Max's plate. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable to them, but to me it was deafening. The clinking of forks, the hum of a carol from the radio, the faint crackle from the fireplace, all of it felt like noise covering what we refused to say. We've all smiled for that perfect family photo while wishing we were anywhere else. If your happy picture hides a whole movie's worth of drama, drop a dot in the comments. Let's see how many Oscar-worthy families we've got here, and don't forget to like if you relate. I wanted to tell her I missed her, that even after all the years of distance and silence, a part of me still hoped she'd look at me the way she looked at him, proud, admiring, loving, but that kind of honesty didn't belong here. In this house, emotions were polished away like fingerprints on the silverware. After a few glasses of wine, Max leaned back in his chair, his words louder, looser. "You know, Mom," he said, grinning, "you really outdid yourself this year. Best dinner yet. You should open a restaurant." She laughed, delighted. "Oh, you stop it." I looked at her, at the way her eyes glowed when he spoke, how she tilted her head just slightly, like she was soaking in every word. And I felt that familiar ache again, the one I had carried since childhood, the ache of being seen, but never really noticed. "Ellie," Dad said suddenly, as if remembering I existed, "how's the city treating you?" "It's good," I said. "Busy, but good." "That's nice," he murmured, and went back to his plate. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. It was just empty. The emptiness was the worst part. It didn't bruise or sting. It just sat there, cold and heavy, a reminder that sometimes being ignored hurts more than being hated. I glanced toward the sideboard where my gift lay, the little envelope tied with a red ribbon. It looked small compared to the sparkling decorations around it, but to me, it was everything. My offering. My olive branch. My hope that maybe this year she'd see me not as the dutiful daughter who always overdid things, but as someone who cared. I imagined the moment she'd open it, her eyes softening, her smile breaking into something genuine. I pictured laughter, gratitude, maybe even a small hug. The fantasy was almost enough to keep me going. Dinner ended with the usual ritual compliments to Mom, jokes from Max, polite smiles all around. When she poured coffee and served dessert, I caught my reflection in the silver tray. My smile looked fine, practiced, unshaken, but my eyes told a different story. I had come home hoping for warmth, and instead found a stage. As I cleared my plate, Mom brushed past me, whispering, "Don't fuss with the dishes, dear. You always make such a mess of my system." There it was again, the tone, the dismissal wrapped in sugar. I forced another smile and stepped back. Standing by the window, I watched the snow drift down outside, soft and silent. From the living room came the sound of Max's laughter and Mom's voice, full of pride. I should have felt angry. Instead, I just felt hollow, like something inside me had been quietly scooped out. And still, I held on to that stubborn thought. Maybe once she opened her gift, once she saw how much I cared, things could change. But deep down, something colder whispered a truth I didn't want to hear. Sometimes the people you love most will never love you the way you need them to. And that kind of truth doesn't shout. It just sits in the quiet, waiting to be heard. By the time dessert was finished, the house smelled like cinnamon and polished wood. Mom dimmed the lights slightly, the way she always did to make the room feel softer, warmer. The tree in the corner sparkled under the dim glow, its ornaments perfectly arranged, its beauty just as precise as everything she touched. From a distance, it could have been a picture on a holiday card, but sitting there, in the middle of it, all I felt was how far away everything seemed. Mom was laughing at something, Max said, her head tilted back, her smile easy and confident. Dad nodded along, stirring his coffee as though he were keeping time. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, rehearsing the words I'd been planning to say for weeks. Every part of me wanted this moment to matter. I glanced at the small red ribboned envelope sitting on the sideboard. That little piece of paper represented every hour of overtime I had worked, every sacrifice I had made to give them something that felt special. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing them that I listened, that I cared, that I remembered the small dreams they had once shared when life was simpler. For a long time, I hesitated. The sound of forks clinking, the low hum of a carol in the background, the faint crackle from the fireplace. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Maybe this was it, I told myself. Maybe this was the moment everything could start to heal. I stood up, my knees trembling a little, but I smiled anyway. "I have something for you," I said, my voice lighter than I felt. Mom turned, eyebrows lifted. Max smirked, half amused. Dad looked up, polite and tired. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the envelope. "It's for you and Dad," I said softly, placing it in her hands. "I thought maybe it was time you both took a real break. You used to talk about that lakeside place, remember? The one you said you'd go to someday." For a second, there was silence, and in that silence, I saw something shift in her face. Surprise first, then confusion, then something colder. "Oh, Ellie," she said finally, her voice too sweet to be kind. "You shouldn't have wasted your money on something like this." I froze. She opened the envelope, glanced at the printout, the booking confirmation, the hotel logo. Her expression didn't soften, it hardened. "Honestly," she went on, sighing, "who's going to take care of the house if we go running off like that? Your father can't just drop everything." Dad cleared his throat, as if trying to make himself disappear. Max chuckled into his wineglass, shaking his head. "Mom, it's just a weekend," I said, still smiling though I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. "You've always wanted to go, and I thought—" She waved a hand, cutting me off. "You always do this, Ellie. Always overdo things. You make a big show out of everything. Sometimes simple gestures mean more." There was laughter then, light and forced, filling the space like a cover for the wound she had just opened. I laughed too, because that's what I'd always done, but my chest ached like something had cracked inside me. She didn't stop there. "Honestly, if you saved that money instead of spending it on silly surprises, maybe you'd have something to show for yourself." Her words landed like stones, heavy, sharp. I tried to stay calm. I said, "It wasn't about money, Mom. It was about time, about giving you both something peaceful." But she just rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, "You never did understand what real responsibility looks like." Max laughed again. "Maybe next year she'll just get you a gift card, Mom. You know, something simple." Mom chuckled, and even Dad let out a small sound, the kind that isn't quite laughter but isn't protest either. And then, in one breath, the night shattered. Mom looked straight at me, her tone suddenly sharp and tired all at once. "Maybe if you weren't always trying so hard to prove yourself, things around here would be easier." God, Ellie. Sometimes I think, if you hadn't been born, we might have had a little peace. The room went still. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the lights seemed to hum louder, as if the world itself was waiting to see what I'd do. I stared at her, the woman who raised me, the one I had tried all my life to make proud. Her face was calm, almost detached, as if she had just said something factual, something true. Max blinked, awkward, but didn't say a word. Dad lifted his glass and took a slow sip. And just like that, everything inside me fell quiet. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. I felt 13 again, standing in this same kitchen after another argument that ended with her disappointment. I could see Max's grin from that night too, the same one he wore now. I pushed my chair back. The sound of it scraping against the floor cut through the silence. No one stopped me. "Excuse me," I said softly, my voice barely holding. I walked down the hallway, past the framed photos of smiling faces, the birthdays, the graduations, the vacations that looked happier than they were. Every picture told a story that wasn't mine. When I reached my old bedroom, I closed the door quietly and leaned against it. The laughter started up again downstairs, faint and hollow, like the soundtrack of a life I was no longer part of. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the wallpaper I'd picked when I was 13, little blue flowers now faded and peeling. It was like stepping into a time capsule, one filled with all the versions of me that had tried so hard to be enough. The gift lay unopened on the dresser, my gift, my hope, my mistake. Tears came, but not many. Mostly it was exhaustion, the kind that comes when you finally see the truth you've been trying to ignore. My mother's words echoed in my head, over and over, until they stopped sounding cruel and started sounding final. Maybe if you hadn't been born. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my shaking hands. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like part of this family. I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Downstairs, they kept laughing, their voices muffled by walls. I suddenly wanted to break through and leave behind. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother had just told me she wished I'd never existed. But as I sat there in the silence, I realized something she never would. She had no idea how much of her world I had already been holding together. And for the first time, I started to wonder what would happen if I stopped. I sat on the edge of my old bed, long after the laughter downstairs faded into the quiet hum of the house. The walls felt thinner than I remembered, as if every word from below could still reach me. Every few minutes, I could hear the faint sound of dishes clinking, the low murmur of voices. They were probably still talking about me, though maybe they had already moved on, back to pretending everything was perfect. They were good at that. The air in my room was cold, still carrying that faint scent of lavender from the sachets Mom used to hide in my drawers. The same smell that used to comfort me as a kid now felt suffocating, like a perfume trying too hard to cover something rotten. I stared at my hands, the same hands that had written checks, signed transfers, worked overtime shifts, just so they could have a life that looked effortless. Her words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Maybe if you hadn't been born. At first I thought I misheard her, but no, I knew that tone. It was the same one she used whenever she wanted to hurt and pretend she didn't mean to. My chest tightened, a heat spreading under my ribs, not sadness this time, something darker, anger, the kind that doesn't explode, but burns slow, steady, patient. I stood up and walked toward the closet. The door creaked, a sound I knew by heart. Behind the hanging coats and boxes of forgotten things, I found what I was looking for, an old cardboard box labeled receipts and stuff in my handwriting. I had left it there years ago, not because I planned to come back for it, but because some part of me wanted proof that I had once tried. I pulled it out and set it on the bed. Dust rose into the air, catching the faint glow of the lamp. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were years of quiet evidence, old utility bills with my handwriting on them, payment receipts for the house when Mom said they were short 1 month, transfer slips from my bank account to theirs. Each one a memory of a phone call that started with guilt and ended with gratitude. Gratitude that never lasted. There were notes, too. Mom's handwriting in that elegant, careful script. "Can you help us just this once? We'll pay you back soon." They never did. I dug deeper. Grocery receipts from the months when they said things were tight. Credit card statements from when Dad's account had been frozen. Records from Daniel's no, Max's rehab stay, the one Mom told everyone Dad had paid for. But it was me. It had always been me. I stared at the stack of papers spread across the blanket. Each one a piece of my life quietly traded for their comfort. I could still remember the nights I skipped dinner because I'd sent them money. The weekends, I canceled plans to work extra shifts. The mornings I told myself it was worth it, because this was what family did for each other. But family, I realize now, was supposed to go both ways. My throat felt dry. I flipped through more papers, my pulse quickening. A loan contract with my name on it, covering the down payment when Max's car got repossessed. A letter from the vet for Mom's cat, with my credit card number scribbled at the bottom. All the ways I had cleaned up their messes, invisible and unacknowledged. And all the while, they told me I was dramatic, emotional, too much. I sat back, staring at the evidence of my own erasure. My chest felt tight, but the tears wouldn't come anymore. They had burned out. What filled me now wasn't sorrow. It was a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. Every check I had written, every dollar I had sent, was a quiet apology for existing. And now, she had finally said it out loud, that she wished I hadn't. The room felt smaller the longer I sat there. The wallpaper, once a soft blue with tiny flowers, now looked like it was closing in. I wanted to scream, to break something, to shatter the stillness that kept pressing against me. But instead, I just breathed, steady, and slow, because the anger needed to stay cold if it was going to mean anything. I looked at the papers again, this time not with guilt, but with something that felt like resolve. Proof. That's what this was. Proof that I had been the one holding the foundation together while they took credit for standing tall. They wanted a perfect family. I was the glue that made it look real. I gathered everything into piles, bills, transfers, receipts, notes. My hands moved fast, methodical, the way Mom used to arrange her Christmas decorations. Except, this wasn't decoration. This was dissection. At the very bottom of the box, I found something else. An envelope stuffed with cards I had written years ago but never gave. Birthday cards, thank you notes, little letters filled with words I had meant at the time. Love, gratitude, forgiveness. I read one, written in messy handwriting from some long night years ago. I just want us to be close again. I miss you. I almost laughed. The girl who wrote that was still trying to be loved. Underneath the cards was an old photo, bent at the corners. The four of us standing by a lake, sunlight spilling across the water, Mom smiling, Dad holding a fishing pole, Max making bunny ears behind my head. I was 12, sunburned and laughing, caught in a rare moment when everything looked simple. It was the same lake I had booked for their Christmas getaway. I held the photo for a long time, tracing the faded edges with my thumb. For a moment, I wanted to believe that day had been real, that we had been a family. But even then, I remembered how she had scolded me for getting mud on my shoes. Love without respect isn't love. It's just obligation wearing a mask. I spread the papers across the bed one last time. Years of invisible labor, of quiet sacrifices no one had noticed. It was all here, undeniable. Then, slowly, something shifted inside me. The hollow ache began to change shape. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was purpose. If she wanted to see what life looked like without me, maybe it was time to show her. I stacked the papers neatly, folded the photo, and placed it on top. The weight of it felt final, like closing a chapter. The anger that had burned hot all night settled into something colder, steadier. For the first time, I didn't feel like the child trying to earn forgiveness. I felt like the adult holding the truth. And that truth, I decided, would no longer stay buried. The papers lay spread across my bed like a crime scene. Each receipt, each note, each transfer told a story I had tried to forget. They weren't just numbers or bills. They were pieces of my life, fragments of every time I chose silence over confrontation. For years, I had convinced myself that keeping peace was the same as keeping love. Tonight, I finally saw how wrong I had been. The house was quiet now. Downstairs, the lights had dimmed, and the faint sound of the TV hummed through the floorboards. I could picture Mom probably washing dishes with that same tense precision. Max sprawled on the couch scrolling his phone, Dad pretending to be asleep in his chair. To them, the night was over. To me, it was just beginning. I stared at the piles of evidence on the bed, my heartbeat steady, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. The anger that had once burned wild inside me now felt controlled, cold, and deliberate. This wasn't about shouting anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about the truth. The truth that had lived quietly in my shadow, waiting to be seen. I pulled my laptop closer, the blue light flickering across the papers. My reflection stared back at me in the dark screen, tired eyes, but clear. I opened a blank document and started typing. At first, it was just the facts. Dates, amounts, transactions. The winter, they almost lost the house, and I paid the overdue mortgage. The time the electricity stayed on because I sent money without them asking. The year Max's car got repossessed, and I covered it with my bonus. The hospital bills after Dad's fall, the rehab payments for Max, the vet bill for Mom's cat. Every secret rescue they had quietly rewritten into their own version of sacrifice. As I typed, the words flowed faster. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from release. I wrote down the things I had never dared to say out loud. The manipulations disguised as love. The guilt they used like currency. The way Mom's affection always came with conditions. The way Dad's silence protected everyone but me. Line by line, the truth took shape. I added scans of the receipts, screenshots of old emails, text messages where mom thanked me one day and denied needing my help the next. I organized everything into folders, labeled neatly like a report: home, health, Max, miscellaneous. It looked professional, almost clinical. That made it better. Facts were harder to argue with than feelings. Somewhere between organizing and rereading, I realized I wasn't just documenting what happened, I was reclaiming it. Every line I typed pulled a piece of me back from the fog they had buried me in. Around midnight, I paused and looked out the window. Snow was still falling, quiet and relentless. The world outside looked peaceful, untouched. I wondered how many houses out there were just like ours, glowing warm from the outside, freezing on the inside. I turned back to the screen. It wasn't enough to just write it. They would never read it if I left it here. They needed to see it, to face it, to feel the weight of what they had done. That was when the idea came to me. A video. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. I opened a simple editing program and began piecing it together. Each image, each document, each line of truth. I added my voice, calm and steady, reading the facts over the soft hum of background silence. No music, no tears, just my voice and the truth they had spent years pretending did not exist. When I finished, I watched the first few minutes. My tone didn't waver. It sounded almost detached, but beneath it, the emotion was there, quiet, strong, impossible to ignore. Then I added one final frame. Since you said you wish I was never born, here is what life without me looks like, followed by a single line in white letters on a black background. You got your wish. I'm gone. I played it back once, the entire 10 minutes, and for the first time all night, I felt calm. Not the numb kind of calm that comes from giving up, but the peaceful kind that comes from finally being done explaining yourself. I saved the file and sat for a moment, the glow of the screen fading against my face. The room felt different now, lighter somehow. My breathing slowed. My body, which had been tense for hours, finally unclenched. I looked at the photo from the lake again, the one I had found earlier. I thought about that day, how she had smiled for the camera, how I had believed her laughter meant something real. Maybe it had, once. Maybe there was a version of her that knew how to love without control. But that version was gone, buried under years of resentment and pride. I closed the photo and turned back to my laptop. The file sat there, waiting. I named it Christmas Truth. Then I searched Dad's old desk drawer and found what I was hoping for: a small flash drive. The label faded. It used to hold family photos, the kind Mom would show guests every December, proof of how happy we were. I smiled faintly. It was poetic in its own way. This time, the flash drive would hold a different kind of memory. I copied the video onto it and waited until the progress bar reached 100%. When it finished, I ejected it carefully, holding it between my fingers like a secret that could finally breathe. In the drawer beside the bed, I found a small velvet jewelry box, the kind Mom used for her fancy gifts. I placed the flash drive inside and wrapped it in a piece of silver paper from the stash she kept in the closet. I tied it with a thin white ribbon and wrote her name on the tag in neat, even letters. Mom. When I finished, I set it gently on the nightstand. The perfect gift, wrapped in truth. Then I sat back, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of tomorrow. I knew exactly what it would bring, and for once, I was ready for it. Morning crept in slowly, soft and pale through the curtains. The world outside was covered in a thin sheet of white, clean and silent, the kind of winter morning that looks perfect from a distance. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the faint sounds of the house waking up, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the muffled hum of the coffee maker, the shuffle of slippers on tile. For a moment, I could almost pretend it was just another Christmas morning, but it wasn't. I sat up and looked at the small silver box on my nightstand. It gleamed softly in the morning light, the ribbon still perfectly tied. It looked innocent, like every other present under the tree downstairs. No one would know that inside it wasn't perfume or jewelry, but something far heavier: the truth. I got dressed slowly, as if I were preparing for a ceremony. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. The anger that had once burned through me now sat deep and quiet, no longer a fire but a blade. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look like the same Ellie who had driven here last night full of hope and hesitation. She looked older, sharper, unafraid. Downstairs, the living room glowed with that artificial warmth only Christmas lights can create. The tree stood tall in the corner, every branch perfectly decorated, no ornament out of place. Mom was already moving around the room, fussing over mugs of coffee and adjusting the ribbons on the gifts beneath the tree. Max lounged on the couch, yawning, phone in hand, still half asleep. Dad sat in his recliner, his glasses fogged, pretending to read the paper. "Merry Christmas," I said softly as I stepped into the room. They all looked up, smiling in that mechanical way families do when they are performing for one another. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Mom said, voice bright. "I made cinnamon rolls. Go pour yourself some coffee." I nodded, poured a cup, and sat down. My hands wrapped around the mug, letting the heat sink into my skin. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. Everything looked so normal it was almost cruel. After a few minutes of small talk, Mom clapped her hands lightly. "All right, who wants to start with the gifts?" Max smirked. "Ladies first," he said, handing her a large, shiny bag. She laughed, pulled out a sweater, held it up for everyone to admire. "Beautiful," she said, kissing his cheek. They went through the usual ritual laughter, thank yous, the sound of crinkling paper. My name was barely mentioned. When it was only in passing. "Ellie dear, can you hand me the scissors? Or would you throw this wrapping away?" I waited, patient, polite, and then, when there were only a few gifts left, I stood and walked toward the tree. "This one's for you," I said, picking up the small silver box and placing it gently in her hands. Her eyes flicked to the tag. "From you?" "Yes," I said. "Open it." She smiled, polite but guarded. "You always bring the most interesting gifts." She untied the ribbon slowly, peeled back the paper, and lifted the lid. Inside, the flash drive gleamed against the red velvet lining, beside a small folded note. She frowned. "What is this?" "Just read it," I said. She opened the note. Her voice trembled slightly as she read the words aloud. "Since you said you wish I was never born, here is what life without me looks like." The room went silent. Dad looked up sharply. Max stopped scrolling. The sound of the clock ticking filled the space between us. "What is this supposed to mean?" Mom asked, her voice rising. "You'll see," I said quietly. "It's all in there." I watched as she walked to the side table, inserted the flash drive into her laptop, and double-clicked the file. The screen lit up with photos, documents, and numbers. My voice began to play calm, steady, undeniable. It started with the mortgage payment, the one that saved their house. Then came the bank transfers, the utility bills, the rehab receipts. My voice narrated each one, explaining how I had covered their debts, how I had helped when they claimed no one else would. Mom's face changed with every new image. Her confident smile faltered. Her eyes darted between the screen and me. Dad's hands tightened around his mug. Max shifted in his seat, looking suddenly smaller. I didn't move. I just watched. No one spoke. No one could. When the video ended, the screen went black. Then came the final line in white letters. "You got your wish. I'm gone." Mom covered her mouth. "Ellie," she whispered. "How could you do this to us?" I stood slowly. "Do what? Tell the truth?" Her voice broke. "You've humiliated this family." I almost laughed. "No, Mom. You did that the night you told your daughter she should never have been born." Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ellie, maybe we can talk about this." "No," I said, cutting him off gently. "We had 28 years to talk. You chose silence. So did I, but not anymore." I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. The room felt too small now, the air too heavy. I looked at them one last time. "Merry Christmas," I said softly. No one moved as I walked to the door. The only sound was the faint rustle of the tree behind me, the whisper of the ornaments shifting in the warm air. When I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch sounded final. Outside, the cold hit my face, sharp and clean. The air smelled of snow and pine. I walked to my car, brushed off the thin layer of frost, and started the engine. Through the window, I could still see the glow of the Christmas lights inside. A perfect little scene. A perfect little lie. Raise your hand if your family photo should have won an Oscar for Best Fiction, because some homes only look warm in pictures. Drop a dot if you've ever played your role too well, and hit that like button for every silent actor at the family table. As I drove down the street, I imagined them sitting there, frozen, replaying the video again, realizing every word was real, every number, every quiet act of love they had turned into obligation. For once, the silence belonged to them, not me. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sorrow. What I felt was something colder, steadier freedom. As the snow began to fall again, I whispered into the stillness, "Merry Christmas, Mom," and for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. The drive away from that house felt longer than usual, but not because of the distance. Every mile I put behind me felt like a layer of something heavy peeling off my chest. The snow was falling harder now, soft flakes swirling through the headlights, blurring the world around me into silver and white. The silence inside the car was perfect. No music, no voices, no rehearsed cheer. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the slow realization that I was finally free. For years, I had dreamed of leaving that house on my own terms, not in anger, not in tears, but in clarity. Tonight, I had done it. I had walked out without raising my voice, without begging to be heard. I had said everything I needed to say, not with words, but with truth. It was strange how peaceful it felt, how light. The town faded behind me, its Christmas lights flickering like distant stars. I thought about what might be happening back at the house. Mom probably pacing the kitchen, her perfect holiday morning shattered. Dad sitting in silence, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. Max trying to make jokes that no one laughed at. I pictured them replaying the video, realizing that this time, there was no way to twist it, no way to blame me, no way to erase what they saw. For once, they would have to sit in the truth. I stopped at a small roadside inn just outside the city. The neon sign buzzed faintly, half of the letters burned out. The parking lot was empty, except for my car, and an old pickup covered in snow. Inside, the lobby smelled like coffee and dust. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I checked in. She handed me a key, and I went to my room. The room was small but clean. One bed, one lamp, one window. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the heater rumble to life. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but the kind of quiet that didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I took off my coat, my shoes, and lay back against the pillow. The exhaustion hit all at once, not just from the night, but from years of holding everything together. My body felt heavy, but my mind was clear. For the first time, there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove. The image of Mom's face when she watched the video replayed in my head. The shock, the disbelief, the fear. She had spent her whole life controlling the narrative, and now that control was gone. I didn't hate her for it. Not anymore. Hate required energy, and I was done giving her any part of mine. What I felt instead was distance, the kind that separates the person you were from the one you finally become. I realized that this, right here, was what peace actually looked like. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was simply absence. The absence of need, of guilt, of the endless urge to make things right. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with missed calls. Mom's name again and again, then Dad, then Max. Dozens of messages. I didn't open any of them. I didn't have to. I knew what they said before even reading them. Mom would be furious, pretending she was the victim. Dad would be apologetic but vague, as always. Max would try to make me feel guilty. The same pattern, the same cycle. I silenced the phone and turned it face down. For once, I let their words stay unanswered. Outside, snow piled against the window pane. The world felt muffled, wrapped in white silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the flakes, drifting under the streetlight. A strange thought came to me. Maybe Mom's wish had come true in a way. The Ellie she had known, the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible backbone was gone. The woman sitting here now was someone new. I smiled at the thought. It wasn't a triumphant smile, not one of victory or pride. It was softer, almost fragile, the kind of smile that comes from finally understanding that letting go doesn't mean losing. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was spilling through the curtains, turning the snow outside to gold. I stretched, feeling lighter than I had in years. I made coffee in the small machine on the counter and sat by the window with the warm cup in my hands. The air smelled like freedom, bitter and sweet at once. I checked my phone again out of habit. More missed calls, more messages, but one stood out from Dad. Just 5 words. "You didn't deserve that, kiddo." For a second, I almost felt tears rise. Almost. But I didn't cry. I just nodded to myself and whispered, "I know." I packed my things slowly, not in a rush. When I stepped outside, the world was bright and quiet. The snow crunched softly beneath my boots. The road ahead was empty, the horizon open. I didn't know where I was going next, and for once, that uncertainty didn't scare me. As I drove back toward the city, I passed neighborhoods wrapped in twinkling lights, children building snowmen, couples walking hand in hand, the kind of Christmas scenes I used to ache for. But now, I didn't envy them. I didn't feel excluded. I just felt separate, and at peace with it. Somewhere behind me, my family would be dealing with the fallout, trying to rebuild the image they had worked so hard to maintain. Maybe they would learn something from it. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my job anymore to hold them together. As the highway stretched out in front of me, I rolled down the window just a little. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. It filled my lungs like a reset. For years, I had carried the weight of their silence, their judgment, their unspoken expectations. Now, driving away with the sun on my face and the wind in my hair, I realized that weight was finally gone. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I wasn't their disappointment either. I was just Ellie. And that, at last, was enough. 1 year later, Christmas came quietly. No long drive through icy highways, no suitcase packed with hope, no pit in my stomach wondering if this time would be different. The snow still fell outside my apartment window, but it looked softer somehow, like the world had finally stopped demanding anything from me. I woke up to sunlight instead of tension. My little apartment was warm, filled with the faint scent of coffee and cinnamon from the candle on my table. There was no shouting, no forced laughter, no sound of my name said with disappointment. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like peace, not emptiness. I made breakfast slowly, humming along to an old song playing on the radio. I did not have to be careful about every word I said or every move I made. I did not have to pretend I was fine. The air here felt light, honest. After I ate, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the snow cover the city rooftops. People were out walking, carrying gifts, pulling children on sleds. A year ago, that sight would have made me ache with longing. Today, it made me smile. I thought about my family, though not with the same sting as before. It was strange how time softened the edges of pain. I still remembered the look on Mom's face that morning, the way her voice cracked when the truth hit her, but I did not replay it out of anger anymore. It had simply become part of the story, one I no longer lived inside. From what I had heard through relatives, things were different back home now. Mom stopped hosting the big holiday dinners. Dad retired early, though no one said why. Max disappeared from social media for a while. I imagined the silence in that house, the way it must echo now without me filling the spaces they ignored. Maybe they finally had what they wanted, peace, without me. I no longer wanted to know the details. For so long, I had defined my life by their approval, their moods, their needs, but life was bigger than that. It stretched far beyond the walls of that perfect little house and all its polished lies. I glanced around my apartment. It was small, but filled with pieces of myself. A secondhand bookshelf covered in plants that refused to die. A crooked little Christmas tree I had decorated with friends a week earlier. Strings of fairy lights looped across the wall, soft and uneven but warm. This was my kind of imperfect beauty. That night, a few close friends came over, people who had become my chosen family. We cooked simple food, laughed until we cried, and shared stories about holidays gone wrong. The kind of stories that did not hide the messy parts, the kind that made you feel human. When the night grew quiet again, I found myself sitting by the tree, watching the lights flicker gently. There was no guilt in the quiet, no ache in the stillness, just calm. On the coffee table sat a small box wrapped in brown paper, a gift for myself. I opened it slowly and smiled when I saw what was inside: a thin silver bracelet engraved with one word: peace. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it meant more than anything I had ever received, because it was the first gift I had ever bought simply for me, without guilt, without needing anyone else to see it. I slipped it onto my wrist and looked at how it caught the light. It felt like closure. Not the dramatic kind where everything is forgiven or forgotten, but the quiet kind that comes when you finally stop asking why. For a long time, I thought justice meant making them see what they did to me, but now I understood something different. Real justice was not about their regret. It was about my release. The revenge I thought I wanted had already transformed into something purer: freedom. I had walked away, and the world had not collapsed. In fact, it had opened wider than ever. I leaned back, listening to the hum of the city outside. Somewhere far away, I imagined my family still trying to piece together the image of who they were before the truth cracked it open. Maybe one day, they would see things clearly. Maybe they would not. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility. I thought of my mother then, not as the cold woman from that Christmas Eve, but as someone small and frightened, trapped by her own pride. Maybe she believed love had to look perfect to be real. Maybe she never learned that imperfection was where love truly lived. And for the first time, I did not wish things had been different. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I stood, turning off the lights one by one, until only the tree glowed in the corner. The apartment felt warm and alive, not because of noise or people, but because of what it represented: a life that belonged entirely to me. I whispered a small toast to the empty room, to peace, to truth, to finally being enough. The wind howled softly outside, brushing against the window like a lullaby. I lay on the couch, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. But for once, I was not dreading it. There were no expectations, no ghosts waiting at the edge of my thoughts. Only the quiet certainty that I had survived the storm and come out whole. I did not need to fix anyone anymore. I did not need to prove my worth. I did not even need to forgive in order to move on. I had already done the hardest thing of all. I had let go. And that, I realized as I drifted to sleep under the soft glow of the tree, was the real miracle of Christmas. Okay. Sometimes peace isn't found in forgiveness, or return; it's found in choosing yourself and walking away with grace. Because the coldest nights often teach the warmest truths. And maybe, just maybe, Christmas stops feeling lonely the moment you click subscribe.